Hello, welcome or welcome back. My name is Ari and today we talk DRIZZT. So before I get into the actual books, I kind of want to give you a background on what this read-through is. Because the DRIZZT novels are set in the Forgotten Realms universe, and it's not just like a single author writing in his or her own fantasy world. There are dozens of authors who write in the Forgotten Realms universe, and DRIZZT is only a single character written by a single author in this universe. And what Forgotten Realms is the book version of Dungeons and Dragons or D&D. So all of the magical rules or like races, gods, goddesses, all of that kind of thing are based in Dungeons and Dragons lore. And a lot of Dungeons and Dragons, like guidebooks or lore books, you'll find mention of these Forgotten Realms characters like DRIZZT or Elminster. Those two are probably the most popular. But what I'm doing with this read-through is I am reading all of the books by R.A. Salvatore, and almost all of them, though not all of them, follow DRIZZT as the main character. So unlike the Shannara read-through I'm doing, where it's going to be different characters every single series or books, all of these books are going to come back to, or either involve or come back to DRIZZT. So he's a very important character and I will be talking about him a lot. Also about the pronunciation of his name. DRIZZT is spelled like this. And there has been an argument in the community for many years as to whether this is spelled or is pronounced DRIZZT or DRIZZT. And R.A. Salvatore refuses to answer. His response is yes. Which basically means pronounce DRIZZT however the fuck you want to, and I choose to pronounce it DRIZZT instead of DRIZZT. If you want to pronounce it DRIZZT, that's perfectly fine. Like, live your best life. But for those of you who aren't super familiar with Forgotten Realms or Dungeons and Dragons or anything like that, first off, you don't have to play Dungeons and Dragons to read the Forgotten Realms books. I've read a huge portion of them. I've got 2 shelves on my bookshelves that are like double, triple stacked that are just Forgotten Realms novels because I used to read them in high school and I love them. And I've never played Dungeons and Dragons once in my entire life. Not once. They're just fantasy books with very, I guess I would say, generic fantasy characters. You've got elves, dwarfs, mages, clerics, rangers, fighters, druids, all sorts of just what you would think is like generic nerd stuff. DRIZZT specifically is a drow or a dark elf from the capital isn't the right word. Major might be the right word. The major city of Minzo Benerzen, I think is how you pronounce it. I'm going to pronounce a lot of these names wrong. Just go with it. Which is the goddess Los, like, home city. It's not the only drow city, but it is like Los home base. And drow from that city think that they are the premier drow city, though if you went to a different drow city, they'd probably think that they're the most important drow city. That's just how drows work. Drow are evil beings, and in the realm of Dungeons and Dragons, evil is taken very literally, with like black and white, darkness, lightness. And drow are elves that have black skin and live underground in like caverns that are like 3 weeks walk from the nearest outside anything. And before we get into like the idea that having black skinned elves that are evil is a race thing, it's possibly, like, I will say that possibly that started out as a racial prejudice, a microaggression, but they're not in any way African inspired. And they've got the features of an elf. So, like, tiny, short little creatures, pointed ears, very fey-like, delicate features, which could describe an African American, but could also describe somebody of any indeterminate race. And when I say they have black skin, I mean black like the color of this couch, not like a brownish color of like human skin, of a dark tinted human skin. They also have shockingly white hair and typically red eyes. They have red eyes because they don't use light. They're underground. They see everything in infrared and, you know, deal with others by heat, or visually see through heat sensor instead of what is the word I'm looking for, instead of like normal human sight. Even though they can see normally, they just don't because they have no use for the sky or anything like that. The goddess that the drow in at least this book worship is Loth. She is the Spider Queen, and she is a goddess of chaos and just chaotic evil. If you know like the deity chart or the alignment chart, that's what the word I'm looking for, the alignment chart for Dungeons and Dragons, she is chaotic evil. It is a very matriarchal society, and like a lot of insects, the drow females are physically larger than drow males, and they're evil. Like, it's a warring society. It's very me. The only thing really important to them is their survival, their influence, their power. And this is the world that DRIZZT is born into. And that's going to get us into the first book. If you have any like direct questions or you're confused about anything for D&D or the Forgotten Realms universe overall, please feel free to leave that in the comments and I'll do my best to answer it. But I am reading this trilogy in a 3-book compendium. It's the Dark Elf Trilogy Collector's Edition, as it says right here on the cover, but I've only read the first book. The first book is called Homeland, and I'm going to put up an individual cover of it right here while I talk about it, because this is very heavy, and it will be very confusing just to hold up this one single book multiple times during this video, where I'm like wearing different clothes and everything, because I'm reading this over like a week and a half. And so yeah, covers over here. Anyway, Homeland. This DRIZZT was introduced to the Forgotten Realms world in the Icewinddale Trilogy, I believe, and that is the series that I think I'm reading next month, if my chronological order in my mind is correct, which I think it is. And after his introduction in that series, there came a call from R.A. Salvatore's fans that's like, we want more DRIZZT, like, give us more DRIZZT, like, this character is awesome, we want more of him. And so he went and wrote a origin story for DRIZZT, which is what this trilogy is. So in this book, this starts with DRIZZT's birth, and you're introduced to the world of Minzo Baranzan. I'm not positive I'm pronouncing that city name right. And DRIZZT is born to a matron of a house, which is like the head of a household. Her name is Malice Duorden, and she is very evil and trying to claw her way up into power in this city of the Drow. The top 8 matron houses in the city like basically rule the city, and at the start of this book they are the 10th house, and through the power of giving birth, or I guess giving birth like creates magic that can be used or like harnessed, and she uses this power to give, or she uses the power of giving birth to DRIZZT to defeat another house, and then they move up to the 9th house instead of the 8th, or instead of the 10th. I can count, totally. Now, DRIZZT is the 3rd son being born into this family, and as a matriarchal society to a chaotic goddess, they have really no use at all for men. So for at least the noble houses, there's only 2 living sons of a house at any given time, and the 3rd one, or any of them born after 2, are sacrificed to the, or sacrificed to Loth. So he is born and he is meant to be a sacrifice, but the 2nd boy of the house kind of wants to be the 1st boy, so he finds the opportunity to kill his older brother, which means DRIZZT gets to live because now he's the 2nd son of the house. So he wasn't even supposed to, you know, exist at all. But here we go. Later on in DRIZZT's life, he should have been sent to the sorcerer school, because men in this society have a choice between becoming a sorcerer or a warrior. His father, Zakafin, is the house weapons master and wants him to become a warrior, but the brother that was killed on his day of his birth was a wizard, so his mother and sisters want him to be a wizard. And so Zakafin kind of has to convince the women that DRIZZT is better off as a warrior and not a wizard, and it works. So most of DRIZZT's life, as you see throughout this book, should have never happened. The other problem, and this is really the main problem, is DRIZZT isn't evil. DRIZZT is one of the most kind-hearted, wonderful characters in all of the Forgotten Realms series. And we know, like, anybody who's heard of DRIZZT or knows anything about DRIZZT at all, even going into these books, you kind of know that DRIZZT is going to turn out as a good guy, but we don't know how he escapes his homeland of pure evil. And that is really what Homeland is about, is him growing up and having all of these opportunities for horrible corruption into evil because, you know, nature versus nurture type thing, and him somehow, his nature overpowering how he was nurtured. And I'm not really going to spoil the story for you. I think all of the DRIZZT stories are kind of fantastic, so I have no desire to spoil it for you. But we end Homeland with DRIZZT kind of escaping, but he is escaping into the Underdark, where all of the creatures in the Underdark are just as deadly as the Drow, and he has a very, very minuscule, low chance of surviving out in the Underdark. Like, obviously we know he does because there's a bajillion books about him. But it's kind of like he was kind of building up the courage to abandon his home throughout the book, even though in the end he was kind of forced to abandon like the only life he knew, and he kind of sentenced himself to death because it's impossible for an individual to survive alone in the Underdark, or else all of the Dark Elves would have killed off each other by now in their like quest for power. So the next book, which is Exile, is going to be him kind of finding his way through the Underdark. And we know at some point in this series, whether it's the next book in Exile or the last book, which is Sojourn, he is going to end up on the surface. So we're going to travel with him and his survival alone in the Underdark. He's not alone. He has a mystical creature known as Gwynwavir, who is a magical panther who comes out of a statue, which sounds weird, but Gwynwavir is his best friend and his fiercest companion, and they're just lovely together. And Gwynwavir is one of those characters that it's like the animal companion character that you get in a lot of books that everybody just loves, because even though it doesn't speak or talk or anything, it still has, or she, it's a girl, she has a personality. And basically, out of every character we're going to come across in all of this like year plus long read through, Gwynwavir and Pickle are my two favorites. So all that's really left to talk about is how I feel about this. And I was a little worried about going into this that I wouldn't like DRIZZT as much as I remember liking him, since this was written in, I don't know, the 90s? 1998. This was written in 1998, and a lot of things that happened in 1998 are extremely freaking problematic right now. But Salvatore has always taken his writings of DRIZZT and used it to teach young boys, who are the target audience of this, is like teenage boys, to be better people just for the sake of being a better person. And that's why I always liked DRIZZT. So I thoroughly enjoyed rereading this, getting DRIZZT's origin story again, even though I already knew it. This is definitely a 4 stars for me, and I think it's only going to go up from here. I am popping back in here really quick to say that I have never actually pronounced the name of the last book out loud before, and I said it completely wrong. I was saying Sojourn, and it's Sojourn. So I do know how to pronounce it. I just said it wrong. Sorry. Hello. I am finished with Exile. Before I get into the book, I need to make 2 completely random comments. First off, I like rainbows. I don't know if you guys have noticed that yet, but I really like rainbows. Second, you might notice that the stack of books behind me has expanded. I am working on putting together my February TBR, and unsurprising to literally anybody, there are way too many books on it. But you're here to talk about DRIZZT. So at the end of the last book, basically DRIZZT has fled into the wilds of the Underdark, and at the beginning of Exile, he has been living alone, well, alone with Gwynwavir, in the Underdark for 10 years. I'm gonna put this down, put up the book cover here because it's a very heavy tome there. Alone in the Underdark for 10 years, and he is losing himself to like his baser instincts, like, what is that term for it? Like his id, where he doesn't have anybody to talk to, and he's just trying to survive, basically. And he's losing what makes him him by being alone. Basically, the underlying theme of this book is that basic survival isn't enough. You have to have a reason to live, a purpose in life. And it's mostly DRIZZT trying to determine this purpose in life. He eventually kind of presents himself to the deep gnome city that he's been living somewhat nearby, and deep gnomes, which I'm not going to try to pronounce the race name. I'm going to put it up here and then you will see why I'm not going to try to pronounce this. But they are enemies of the drow because they're actually kind of a kind race instead of an evil race like most Underdark races. But they're an intelligent race and they accept DRIZZT into their midst. And he kind of starts coming back to himself, and he's happy for probably the first time in his entire life. 10 years ago when he fled, his house lost the favor of Loth, so they, or because of his actions, right? Because he turned his back on the Spider Queen, she completely stripped the favor from his, clan, his house, until he is killed. And so after 10 years, basically his mother, Matron Malice, decides that now is the time that she has to hunt him down, and she uses a very dark, evil magic to do so, which I'm not going to tell you what exactly that magic is because it's a big spoiler for the first book. But assume that it happens. Anyway, he has to flee the deep gnome city because of the threat from Minzo Baranzan. Probably pronounced that wrong. And he and one of the deep gnomes named Belwar kind of venture out into the Underdark. And most of the book is just their adventures of coming across different creatures or denizens. Is that the right word? Hey Siri, define denizen.
Denizen is a formal and humorous term. It means an inhabitant or a occupant of a particular place.
That is the word I'm looking for. Thank you. But basically they run into other denizens of the Underdark and have adventures. It's a fantasy adventure novel. There's a lot of DRIZZT kicking ass with swords. A lot of, shit happens. Some of it fun, some of it scary. It all makes us love DRIZZT just more and more and more. Anyway, at the end of the book, he defeats the current big bad that his mother has sent after him, but he doesn't realize that because of the failure again, that his house has been completely wiped out by the Banrays, who are the the highest house in the Drow City. And he's like, I can't, my mother and my family are going to keep coming after me. They will not let me go because they will never have the favor of the Spider Queen until they kill me. And I can't continue to be down here. So he flees to the only place left where a drow cannot follow, and that is the surface world. And we end the book with DRIZZT walking outside onto the surface world, and obviously we know that DRIZZT is a famous character, a famous good character in the Forgotten Realms universe, so he has to come to the surface at some point. Like that's something that we knew was going to happen. So if that's a spoiler for you, then you're missing a lot here. Anyway, I assume that Sojourn, which is the third book in this series, is going to be, you know, him making friends on the surface world, and we're going to be introduced to all of like DRIZZT's main friend group, which are like the characters, you know. You got Canterbury, you got Wolfgar, you got Brunor, like all of the great characters that we all know and love. So very, very, very excited for Sojourn, and looking forward to read it. I do want to mention that in Exile we are introduced to one of the main characters like overall for the DRIZZT books, and that is Yarlaxel. He is a male, obviously, dark elf who has like who runs a band of mercenaries, and he's kind of like within the political system of Minzo Baranzen. I can't say that stupid city name, but kind of also on the outskirts of it because it's a matriarchal society and he's a man and he runs a band of men. But I don't know if he was introduced in the Icewinddale Trilogy, but I want to say no. I want to say that he was actually introduced in this book, and he became such a popular character, even though he was only really meant to be a side character, that he just became like intertwined throughout like all of DRIZZT's life, even though they really should have never come across each other. Again, they never actually came across each other in this book. They've never met each other at this point. But he definitely becomes much more prevalent in the dark elf or in the DRIZZT universe in later books, and he is a lot of people's favorite character. He's a very, very cool character. He's very flashy, flamboyant, basically the antithesis of normal drow. Drow are known for having like luscious, long, white locks, and Yarlaxel shaves his head. He also like wears garish colors, and makes a lot of noise, which is very not normal for a drow. I always love that he's described as wearing a vest, like his shirt is a vest that cuts off like right under his breastbone, leaving his abdomen and his abs like exposed, which is not normal for drow clothing. So every time I see a fan art of him, I'll post some fan art over here. It's just fantastic. This is why he's everybody's favorite character. Anyway, I am going to go read Sojourn, and I will be back to talk to you about that one whenever I'm done. I'm done with the Dark Elf Trilogy, and specifically Sojourn. So, 5 stars, and I think a lot of it's out of nostalgia, and realizing that not necessarily this trilogy, but R.A. Salvatore's writing is kind of responsible for a lot of things that I like in my fantasy. One of those things is fight scenes. So my preferred method of reading fight scenes is where the fight scenes happen from multiple perspectives at once, and you're getting like little snippets of battle. Marvel movies does this a lot, where you'll get like little snippets of battle, and then you'll see like all of the good guys are winning, and then all of the good guys start losing, and then all of a sudden they win again. That doesn't really happen in this writing, but that's like the most common way. It does happen sometimes, but it's just the multiple perspectives or multiple small perspectives from one large battle is how I like to read fight scenes, or at least what makes it most interesting to me. I will have the Sojourn cover over here so I don't have to hold up that big book anymore. This book had a lot of nostalgia for me, far more than the other two so far. First off, I completely forgot that Dove Falconhand was a character in this book, and she is by far one of my favorites, like, Forgotten Realms characters, D&D/Forgotten Realms characters all time. She was, I think, originally dreamed up by Ed Greenwood, but she is one of the seven sisters in a chosen of Mystra, who is the goddess of magic. And she is a ranger, which it doesn't make sense that she's not a mage. I get it. Mystra has like weird chosen. Just go with it. But she is a ranger, and she is tasked with like hunting down the evil dark elf at one point in this book, and you get her perspective for a couple of chapters, and it's just all the nostalgia, just everywhere, all the nostalgia. The outline of this book is basically a D&D campaign. Shocking, a book set in the universe of D&D that reads like a D&D campaign. Who would have thought? But DRIZZT comes to the surface, and he is near a human village, which he starts to observe because, you know, drow are evil. No one's going to trust a drow. And through no fault of his, some other bad, evil beings are in the area and kill a family that he has been watching, and then he's blamed for it because people have spotted a drow in the area. And so he avenges the family, but continues to be hunted down. This is where Dove comes in, is the hunting him down part. And ends up moving to a different area, obviously to escape. And he keeps doing good, but continually is not accepted because of his race. Almost like R.A. Salvatore is giving his readers notes on racism and why you should never judge a person by the color of their skin. R.A. Salvatore will do this a lot throughout. He just gives readers lessons about being a good person for the sake of being a good person. And DRIZZT's adventure covers a lot of like racism overtones and everything like that. Once he moves out of that area, he ends up with a blind ranger named Mushi, and ends up spending quite a few years living with Mushi and learning the ways of being a ranger. So if you're familiar with DRIZZT, you usually know that he's a drow ranger, but drow rangers aren't things that exist because rangers are like beings of nature and one with the animals, and that doesn't really happen with drow. So this book covers his origin story of him being a ranger and him figuring out that his goddess is Maliki, I think is how you say that goddess's name. I will put her name here. She is the patron goddess of rangers, if you didn't get that one yet. When DRIZZT met Mushi, there was some really, really fantastic rep there because Mushi is blind. He lost his vision 5-6 years before the events of this book because a dragon fire, and he is able to do everything that he needs to do throughout life without his vision. He misses his vision, but he realizes he doesn't need it, and he has a very good lesson for DRIZZT where he keeps telling DRIZZT, like, you are underestimating me because you think that I am less than whole because I don't have my vision. And that is not true. I am still a person. I am still as capable as anybody else. And you need to realize that and stop underestimating me, because there's nothing to pity. And that rep, like, I'm obviously not blind, but I can imagine that that rep is good rep. Like, that's the kind of rep that needs to be in books. And this book was from like the 90s. And it's got that great of rep. Like, that's how amazing R.A. Salvatore is as a writer, is he does rep like this before good rep was really a thing. So he spends time with Mushi for quite a few years, until, spoiler alert, Mushi dies of old age. And DRIZZT starts traveling to different towns after this, just trying to find a place where he's accepted, and just endlessly turned away, and he's just sad. I mean, never being able to find a home, and endlessly turned away and instantly hated on sight. I mean, that's no way to live. And he wants nothing but, like, the best for everyone. Eventually, he is traveling with a group of monks from, like, a god who craves punishment. Weird. And he, from them, hears of a place called Tin Towns, where rogues and outcasts travel to and live there, because it's in a desolate place called Icewinddale. And he makes his way to Icewinddale, and even there, he can't find a home or happiness or anything like that. He gets the basics of acceptance, and he's told by the human leader of one of the towns in Tin Towns that he can live in the mountains nearby, which it's like, come on, fuck you. And that's kind of where the book ends. But the next series is called the Icewinddale Trilogy. I wonder where this is going to pick up. Basically, at the end of the book, we're introduced to some of the major characters throughout DRIZZT's entire life and through all of his tales. A 11-year-old human girl named Canterbury, and her father, adopted father, who is Brunor Battlehammer, who is the king of dwarfs in that area, or the leader of dwarfs in that area. And those are two people who are very, very important to DRIZZT throughout his life. And these books that we're reading are going to cover, like, I think nearly 1,000 years, if not more. Dark Elves lives a very long time. And DRIZZT, at the end of this book, is like 40, which is still a child. Like, he's a teenager in elf years. So he's very, very young in this. Even for all the life experiences that he has. He's very, very young. Obviously, I greatly enjoyed my revisit for the Dark Elf Trilogy. This month, 100%, DRIZZT beat out Shannara, like, easily. The Shannara trilogy that I read this month was extremely mediocre, and DRIZZT was my everything. So that tells us that DRIZZT has a much better starting point than Shannara for reading everything chronologically. Not great for Shannara. I can rejudge that once we get to publication order. So the first publication of DRIZZT books we're going to see next month. That is not true for Shannara. Shannara's, we still have prequels coming out next month. But for DRIZZT, Icewinddale Trilogy, which I am very excited to read because we'll get to meet the rest of DRIZZT's companions and friends, and I also think we meet DRIZZT's arch enemy in the Icewinddale Trilogy, if I am not mistaken, which is exciting. So I am ready. I don't know if you're ready, but if you would like to join in with me on the DRIZZT read through next month, you can do that without reading these books. Next month, the books were the ones that were published first, so those are the ones that I read first. So if this video sounds interesting and you want to jump in without having to read these, you don't have to read these first. This was just, everybody loved DRIZZT so much from the Icewinddale Trilogy that R.A. Salvatore was like, I'm gonna write his backstory and publish that. And he did a wonderful job on it. So I'm excited. Very, very much. But that is everything for this vlog. I will catch you next month for the Icewinddale Trilogy, and I'll also catch you in the next video. Bye!